Little girls, I am in the business of putting old heads on young shoulders, and all my pupils are the creme de la creme. Give me a girl at an impressionable age, and she is mine for life. You girls are my vocation. If I were to receive a proposal of marriage tomorrow from the Lord Lion, King of Arms, I would decline it. I am dedicated to you in my prime.
ご経いかがですか？渡辺Danです。On today's episode of Hollywood Rants, we're going to talk about film schools, and in particular, a specific aspect of film schools, and that is a lot of the classes. Now, of course, if you take a class in cinematography, you know you're going to exit it with an understanding of how cameras work, of why you use a certain f-stop, why you use a certain focal length or focal distance, why you set your ISO or ASA, as it used to be called, at a certain number, and how all of these various things come together to create an emotional impact. If you're in a screenwriting class, you're obviously learning how to write a screenplay. And that can be fraught with its own set of challenges and misapprehensions. But you still have a direct and very, very tangible outcome from having taken that class. If you take an editing class, same thing. You're going to hope to exit it with a proficiency in at least one or two different pieces of software and understand how that works in the post-production process. You want to learn the skill of editing as well as the aesthetics. Now, there's an area of this that I think for a lot of students is rather controversial, and I've heard it said more than once. They wonder why they're having to take the chalk and talk classes. And what's a chalk and talk class? Well, those are the old academic subjects, such as the history of film or film aesthetics. And there's a lot of times when students feel, well, why do I need to do that? I'm in my own individual artist. I'm not someone who needs to necessarily understand what happened in the past because I'm going to create the future. This is, of course, something that older professors laugh at understandingly because most of us had those same impressions. But I think that there's more of a root to this than meets the eye. And I think that this is an area where perhaps the instructors are not doing the right service. And one of the things that I do, and this was a benefit to me because I ran a grant with economic and workforce development for a number of years. And during the course of that grant, I was talking with both educators and industry to try to figure out the best way to prepare students for the workforce. And a lot of times that wasn't necessarily something that was taught in school. And it's an issue we're still dealing with right now. How do you stop someone from ghosting? How do you convince someone that after they have a degree for which they owe half a house, that they should start by getting someone coffee? And yet these are all very, very important to your later success. But even more important than that is the foundational classes of what happened in the past. Because if you don't know what happened in the past, how can you possibly be ahead of the game and guess, okay, here's a trend. This is something that's happened before. This is the point at which there might be a change. So I got to be ready for it so that I don't get caught unaware. And the easiest way to do that, I have found, is to ask the student, what do you think the job is that comes out of you having taken this class? And my belief is that when a student cannot answer that question, then it is up to the teacher to make sure that they know. And I have a feeling that just as sometimes you don't know what you don't know, sometimes you don't know what you do know. And this is something where because it's not necessarily emphasized enough in the production side, there are a lot of students who go out there in the industry ill-prepared for anything beyond getting that first job and maybe starting up the career ladder. But without having a context of what's happened in the past, you can really cause yourself some damage. So one of the things I've started doing is on my first session of the Chalk and Talk classes, I ask the students, what job do you think this class specifically prepares you for? Not some esoteric job, not some esoteric, well, I'll have this knowledge base, but what exact job does sitting here and knowing the history of film prepare you for? So, what I'm going to talk about today is exactly what job a history and criticism class prepares you for. It is actually a foundational job for anything in the front office. And what do I mean by the front office? I mean the development department, which is where you're looking at material that's coming in and you're saying, oh, I think this is something that we should consider making. Or no, we shouldn't do this because our company doesn't have enough money to do it justice. And for us to even start down that road, we're going to end up with something that's not going to work. So to be in development, if you know the history, your job becomes so much easier. Because let's say, for example, that someone tosses me a script and it's all about an old lady who has some various adventures. And the average person in a production company might say, why the heck would you want to make that? And I'll say, well, first of all, this is a very solid genre. It's worked multiple times. But for us to consider approaching this, we need to look at some of the things that have worked in the past. A Trip to Bountiful, Driving Miss Daisy, Fried Green Tomatoes, all achieved very, very good box office, in spite of the fact that they seem to be uncommercial. Why? Because part of the strategy of saying, let's do it, is because part of the plan in saying let's do it is you figured that you could get at least one Academy Award out of it. And if you could get that one Academy Award out of it, then certainly money would come in. Now, if I didn't know this stuff, if I wasn't a film geek, if I hadn't spent my algebra class in 7th grade trading Academy Award movie quizzes with Rob Blizzard instead of trying to figure out what A squared plus B squared equals C squared really meant, I would never have been able to pull that off. So it's very important that they know that this is what what job comes out of that particular skill set. So not only is it helpful to know what has worked in the past, it's also good to predict what's in the future. For example, now part of this is because I lived through it, but when we saw what happened with Carolco, when Carolco went out of business because it was spending way too much money, and yes, it had a lot of publicity. Yes, it was generating a lot of hits, but it was unsustainable. We can now look at Netflix and say that a company like Netflix is spending too much money relative to the amount that they're bringing in and the amount that they can look to grow in terms of moving forward. So having that back history is helpful for that. So the bottom line is that these chalk and talk classes are far from being something that's just a pain in the rear end. These are foundational to front office, distribution, producing, and being a line producer and being in distribution. So you have a lot of jobs that come from a class that for many students who are sitting in it don't think there is a job associated with it. And for you as a student, please, if you feel that you're taking a class and you don't know why you're taking it, ask the teacher. Have the teacher tell you what job comes from you having sat in this class. You do not want to spend those hours and especially that money and think you've just wasted it. And in all honesty, you don't want to discover that you should have paid more attention when you're sitting there in the job and you know that you learned something at some point and you have no idea how to re-access that information. So pay attention to the classes and always remember you're in a class because there was money associated with a job that came from that class.
Little girls, I am in the business of putting old heads on young shoulders, and all my pupils are the crème de la crème.